When the HOA president screamed, "You have 24 hours to demolish that eyesore, or we're calling the sheriff," I realized I wasn't dealing with ordinary neighbors. I was dealing with people drunk on power, the smell of fresh-cut pine mixed with her choking perfume as she marched toward me like she owned the mountain. Gravel cracked beneath her fancy heels while 3 SUVs idled behind her, headlights glaring through the thin morning fog. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses sharp as her voice, Victoria Ashworth, Queen of Pine Valley, ready to ruin my life before I'd even unpacked a single box. I was 3 days into building my dream cabin when her little army appeared. The mountain air was cool and clean, the creek humming through the pines behind me, and the faint sound of hammering echoed off the hillsides. It felt like heaven until she showed up. Her perfume was so strong it made the sawdust in the air taste sour. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" she barked. I set down my circular saw. "Name's Marcus Brennan, and this," I said, waving a hand toward the half-built frame, "is my land." Her lips tightened. "You mean our community land? You're in violation of multiple covenants. No permits, no architectural review, no environmental clearance. This rustic monstrosity threatens our property values." I glanced around at nothing but miles of forest and sky. "What community? I don't see a single house." "The Pine Valley Homeowners Association governs all residential properties within this jurisdiction," she snapped, producing a glossy folder full of documents. "Your uncle, Silas Brennan, signed these covenants when we formed 6 months ago. You inherited his obligations." That made me pause. 6 months ago? My uncle's been dead 8. Her painted smile never wavered. "Then I suggest you get your affairs in order, Mr. Brennan. Remove all materials within 48 hours. Daily fines start at $500 and double weekly." The way she said Mr. Brennan, like it was dirt under her shoe, made my hands tighten on the saw handle. She looked me up and down, sweaty shirt, old jeans, the pickup truck I'd bought secondhand, and her tone shifted from official to cruel. "Let me be frank. Pine Valley isn't the kind of neighborhood where people in your situation typically thrive. I'd hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by any unpleasantness." The mention of my daughter Emma hit harder than any insult. She'd just turned 15, still dealing with the fallout of my divorce. The one thing I wanted was to show her I could build something solid again. "You threatening my family?" I asked quietly. Victoria's voice turned sugar-sweet. "Just friendly advice. Some battles aren't worth fighting when you're so clearly outmatched." She turned on her heel, her perfume trailing behind her like toxic smoke. 48 hours, Mr. Brennan. Don't make this harder than necessary." When her convoy disappeared down the road, I stood there staring at my cabin's skeleton, half walls, stacked lumber, dreams nailed into place, and felt rage burning like wildfire in my chest. Uncle Silas's last words came back to me. "Don't let anyone push you around." I didn't know yet how deep the corruption went. The next morning, she was back. Same heels, same perfume, this time with a lawyer who looked like he'd lost a fight with his own tie. His name was Douglas Cranky, a nervous man whose suit smelled like cheap cologne and coffee. "You're being served," he mumbled, holding out papers that trembled in his hands. Victoria spoke for him. "You owe $15,000 in retroactive penalties. You never received proper HOA disclosure during property transfer, which means your ownership claims are invalid." $15,000? For building on my own land? Victoria smirked. "You can't afford an attorney. Save yourself the embarrassment." Her confidence was pure venom. But something in her words didn't add up. Uncle Silas died before this HOA even existed. How could he sign anything? When they left, tires crunching down my driveway, I didn't waste time. I drove straight to the county courthouse. The smell of dusty paper and floor polish filled the air as I met with Betty, an old clerk who'd been there since the 70s. Her glasses hung crooked on her nose, and her coffee cup said, "Don't ask me about Mondays." She helped me dig through property records, flipping through stacks of yellowed documents. "That HOA was formed 6 months ago," she said, tracing her finger over a line of legal text. "2 months after your uncle's death certificate." "That's not right." Not right was an understatement. It was impossible. We checked the boundary maps, and that's when my stomach turned cold. The HOA's new jurisdiction covered only 12 houses, and my 5 acres in the middle. My land made up more than half their total area. Betty leaned in, lowering her voice. "Looks like someone drew these boundaries around your property. Real deliberate." I ran my hands through my hair, staring at the map. Every HOA member listed was either related to Victoria or employed by her husband's construction company. This wasn't a community. It was a family racket with paperwork. That's when I called Sarah Kim, a real estate attorney I knew from my electrician days. Her office smelled like coffee and professionalism. She flipped through the documents and looked at me like I'd just handed her a ticking bomb. "This is legally impossible," she said. "They can't bind a deceased person to new covenants. This entire HOA formation is fraudulent." "What can we do?" "We sue. Harassment, false claims, fraud. And if their boundaries were drawn after ownership transfer, that's criminal." I left her office with more hope than I'd felt in months, but hope doesn't stop evil when it's cornered. That night, Jake, my only neighbor who seemed decent, stopped by with a 6-pack and bad news. "Victoria's telling everyone you're some drifter with a criminal past," he said, shaking his head. "People are scared, man. She's spreading lies fast." The cold mountain air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke as we sat on the porch. "She's making a mistake," I said quietly. Jake gave me a worried look. "You sure about fighting her? Folks say she's got friends in high places." Quote, "I've got something better," I said, looking toward Uncle Silas's workshop where the lights flickered faintly through the trees. "I've got the truth." The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. Pine Valley Community Safety Group had tagged my name. The post showed my photo, under the headline, "Beware of dangerous trespasser in our neighborhood." The caption, "Unstable individual caught building illegal structure near children's play areas." The comments made my stomach twist. Neighbors I'd never met calling for the sheriff. People demanding I be arrested. I stared at that post until my hands stopped shaking. Then I closed the app, looked at the half-built cabin and whispered to the wind, "All right, Victoria. You want war? You just declared it." The pine trees stood silent around me, but I swear I could almost hear Uncle Silas laughing through the breeze. The next day, my mountain peace was shattered by the sound of tires crunching over gravel. Victoria's white BMW slid to a stop in front of my cabin like a storm cloud on wheels. The air smelled of exhaust, pine, and the cold bite of arrogance. This time, she wasn't alone. 3 SUVs lined up behind her, each one full of neighbors holding phones like weapons, recording, whispering, judging. She stepped out in designer boots, her clipboard clutched like a sword. "You've ignored our order, Mr. Brennan," she called out, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "This is your last warning before we take legal and criminal action." I wiped sweat off my forehead, hands rough from work. "Lady, I've been building cabins since before you learned how to spell homeowner. You've got no jurisdiction here." "You'll find that's incorrect," she said coolly, signaling her so-called lawyer Douglas Cranky, who scurried out of his car looking like a frightened ferret. His briefcase creaked as he opened it, pulling out more papers. "You owe the Pine Valley HOA $15,000 in violation fees," he announced, voice shaking. "And you must vacate the premises immediately pending review of your ownership." Victoria smiled like a vulture watching its prey stumble. I leaned closer, smelling the sickly sweet perfume mixed with the metallic tang of fresh rain. "You sure you want to go down this road?" Her sunglasses reflected my cabin's frame. "You can't stop what's already in motion." When they finally left, their tires sprayed mud across my driveway. I stood there staring at the mess they left behind, but I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. That night, I took the documents straight to Sarah. Her office light flickered under the hum of a cheap ceiling fan, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with printer toner. She read through every page, her pen tapping against the desk. "They've boxed you in," she said finally. "Redrawn district lines, created bylaws after your uncle's death, and claimed your property through posthumous signature." "That's forgery," I said. She nodded. "And fraud, and maybe bribery if county officials were involved." We spent hours drafting a counter-complaint. By the time I left, the sky had turned to velvet, and the air outside smelled of wet asphalt and pine. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was defending my name. But Victoria didn't back down. The next morning, she fired her next shot, a county inspector in a government truck, clipboard in hand, pretending to be polite. "Morning, Mr. Brennan," he said. "I'm here for an environmental compliance check." "Funny," I said. "Didn't request one." "Orders from the HOA," he mumbled, glancing over his shoulder like someone might be watching. "They filed a complaint about unlicensed waste dumping." He scribbled something on his form and handed me a citation. "You'll need to stop all work immediately." The air between us smelled like damp paper and diesel fuel. His hand trembled as he signed. "Look, I'm just doing my job," he muttered before hurrying off. That's when I realized how far Victoria's reach went. She wasn't just using neighborhood gossip. She was pulling strings at the county level. That evening, Jake came by again, holding his phone like it was radioactive. "Man, you need to see this," he said, scrolling through a new Facebook post from Victoria's community group. My face was plastered all over it, under the headline, "HOA Safety Alert, Possible Criminal Activity in Pine Valley." They'd used an old picture from my electrician days, me holding a power saw on a job site, but edited the background to make it look like I was holding a weapon. Comments piled up. "Dangerous, call the sheriff, protect our kids." Jake cursed under his breath. "She's turning the whole mountain against you." I looked past him toward the lake below the ridge. The water was still, silver under the moonlight. "That woman has no idea what she's playing with," I said. The next morning, a noise jolted me awake, the sound of breaking glass and a faint hiss. The smell of diesel hit first, sharp and heavy. My heart pounded as I ran outside barefoot, cold dirt biting my feet. My lumber pile was wrecked. Someone had knocked over the generator and spilled fuel across the ground. Nails glittered across the driveway like traps catching the early sun. It wasn't an accident. This was a message. By noon, 3 cars parked across my driveway, not blocking it, just close enough to make sure I noticed. When I approached, one driver rolled down his window. "Public road," he said, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. "We're just keeping an eye out for community safety." His smirk made my blood run cold. "Then keep your eyes open," I said, walking past him. "You might see something you don't like." When the cars left, I drove straight back to the courthouse. Betty was waiting. "Back again?" she asked, sipping coffee that smelled like burnt sugar. "Need more records," I said. "Anything connecting the Ashworths to development permits." Her eyebrows arched. "You think they're tied to that new resort project?" "I think they are the project." We dug through the county files again, the sound of papers rustling like dry leaves. Then Betty froze. "Well, look at that," she whispered. "Mountain Vista Resorts. $50 million development plan approved 6 months ago." I leaned over her shoulder. The map showed everything: planned golf course, spa, and luxury cabins. And right in the middle of it all, my 5 acres. "They can't build without your land," Betty said softly. That's when everything clicked. The HOA wasn't about property values. It was about profit. Victoria was trying to force me out so she could sell the whole development to the resort company and collect her cut. That night, I sat at my workbench in Uncle Silas's old workshop. The smell of oil and sawdust wrapped around me like armor. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry and determined. If Victoria wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I installed motion cameras, floodlights, and sound alarms across the property. Every tool I had from my electrician days came out of storage. By midnight, I was ready. The forest was quiet, except for the whisper of wind through the trees and the chirp of crickets. Then, around 1 a.m., I heard it. The soft crunch of tires on gravel. A pickup creeping down my road with its headlights off. I stayed still, watching through the security monitor. The driver got out wearing a hoodie, gas can in hand. He poured liquid near my lumber pile, glancing around nervously. The motion lights snapped on like daylight. His face turned toward the camera. It was Tommy Ashworth, Victoria's son. He froze, eyes wide, caught in perfect 4K clarity. Then he bolted, leaving the gas can behind as he jumped into the truck and tore out of there. I didn't sleep that night. I waited until morning, then drove straight to the sheriff's office with a USB full of footage. When I showed the video, the sheriff's face went pale. "That's the HOA president's boy?" "Yep," I said. "Attempted arson. Might want to have a talk with his mother about that." As I walked back to my truck, the wind picked up through the trees, carrying the smell of smoke and rain. I looked up at the clouds rolling over the peaks. Victoria thought she was the storm. She was about to find out I controlled the whole sky. The morning after I handed over the arson footage, Pine Valley looked different. The air felt charged, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew Victoria's son had been caught red-handed. But that didn't stop her. Power-hungry people never admit defeat, they double down. By noon, a process server showed up at my gate, sweating through his shirt. He handed me a thick envelope that smelled of fresh ink and bad intentions. "Emergency injunction," he muttered, "filed this morning." The papers accused me of running an illegal commercial construction site, violating moral standards, and, my personal favorite, posing a danger to public safety. Victoria wanted $100,000 in community damages and a restraining order keeping me off my own property. I stood there in the quiet mountain air, reading her lies while ravens circled overhead. The hypocrisy was almost funny. But that wasn't all. That afternoon, 3 county trucks rolled up. Inspectors again. One for the environment, one for electrical, one for septic. They poked around pretending to be official while avoiding eye contact. "Orders from the top," one whispered. "Sorry, man." When they left, the air smelled like gasoline and corruption. I sat on my porch and realized Victoria had crossed every line. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was war. Then came the blow that hit hardest. My ex-wife Linda called, her voice tight with anger and fear. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" Emma's crying. She saw Facebook posts saying you're a predator. Her friends won't even talk to her. I felt my blood turn to ice. What posts? The HOA group, pictures, warnings about you being dangerous. They're saying you can't be around kids. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles went white. It's all lies. She made it all up. "Fix it," Linda snapped. "If this affects Emma's custody, the court will destroy you." When the call ended, I sat in the silence of Uncle Silas's workshop. The smell of old oil and pine dust filled the air. My reflection stared back from a dusty window, tired, angry, but not broken. She wanted to destroy my life, my daughter, my reputation. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the final key to her downfall. Jake showed up that evening, eyes wide. "You're not going to believe this. Victoria's own treasurer, Beth Morrison, is asking questions. Says she found invoices for companies that don't exist. The HOA's money's gone, man." She's panicking. I could almost feel Uncle Silas smiling through the creaking timbers of the old cabin. "Then it's time," I said. Time to turn the lights on. Sarah and I spent the next 48 hours preparing. We had everything. Fraud documents, bank statements, Tommy's arson video, and the county bribery trail. But I was saving one secret for last. The one Uncle Silas had left buried under the workshop floor. While clearing the bench for evidence, I'd hit something solid under the old planks. When I pried them open, the musty smell of decades-old dust hit me, followed by the glint of metal. Inside a steel lockbox, I found manila folders, corporate seals, and deeds stamped with my uncle's signature. The discovery made my hands shake. Uncle Silas hadn't just owned 5 acres of mountain paradise. Through a company called Brennan Holdings, LLC, he'd quietly purchased the underlying land for the entire Pine Valley subdivision back in 2010, 47 homes, every one of them sitting on ground he owned. And now, it all belonged to me. Victoria's HOA had been collecting quote fees and issuing citations on property that wasn't legally theirs. She'd been bullying her own landlord. I spread the papers on Sarah's desk. She looked at the documents, then at me. "Marcus," she said softly, "you don't just own your land, you own theirs. Every inch of it." The air in her office felt thick, heavy with the weight of what that meant. "I could evict them all," I said. "You could," she replied. "Or you could do something better." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Emma, about my uncle's words, "Don't let anyone push you around." He hadn't said destroy them. He said don't let them win. By Friday, Pine Valley was buzzing with tension. Victoria had called an emergency community meeting at the town hall, claiming I was a dangerous criminal planning revenge. She didn't know I'd invited reporters, the sheriff, and half the county's legal team. When I walked into that room, every eye turned toward me. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. Victoria stood at the podium in her perfect blazer, voice dripping with fake concern. "This man," she said, pointing at me, "has terrorized our community. He's dangerous, unstable. He's trying to destroy everything we've built." I waited until she finished her speech, until the murmurs filled the hall. Then I stepped forward. "Everything you've built?" I said calmly. "That's funny because from where I'm standing it looks like everything you've built sits on my land." Confusion rippled through the crowd. I opened my briefcase and spread Uncle Silas's deeds across the podium. "My uncle's company, Brennan Holdings, owns the land under every single home in Pine Valley," I said. "That includes yours, Mrs. Ashworth. You're 3 months behind on rent." Gasps echoed through the room. The sheriff stepped closer, reading the papers. "Is this true?" Quote. Sarah handed him the official filings, notarized and verified. "Every document checks out. The HOA has been charging people money for managing property they don't own. That's fraud, wire theft, and tax evasion." Victoria's perfect mask cracked. You can't do this. I built this neighborhood." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You exploited it, and starting today, that ends." The crowd erupted in whispers and shouts. People turned on her. The same neighbors who'd once believed her lies now realized she'd been robbing them blind. When the sheriff's deputies placed her in handcuffs, she started screaming, "You'll regret this, Brennan. You can't just take what's mine." I looked her dead in the eye. "You tried to take everything from me, my home, my name, my family. I'm just reclaiming what was already mine." The cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes. Justice finally had a scent, the crisp, clean mountain air after a storm. Months later, Pine Valley didn't look the same. The HOA was dissolved, the fraud charges stuck, and Victoria was serving time for wire fraud, document forgery, and attempted arson. Her son took a plea deal and left the state. I rebuilt the cabin exactly how I'd dreamed. Emma visited every weekend. The sound of laughter replaced the echo of threats. We renamed the area Brennan Lake Community, where no one had to fear citations for their paint colors or flower choices. Neighbors now worked with me, not against me. The air smelled of barbecue smoke, wet pine, and freedom. On the porch one evening, Sarah joined me, handing over the first rent check from the Transformed Community Fund, money now used to help families fight corrupt HOAs across the state. Emma ran up from the dock, cheeks red from the cold lake air. "Dad, you were right," she said. "Sometimes you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with truth." I smiled, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "Exactly, sweetheart. Truth always wins." Eventually. As the night settled over the mountain, I thought of Uncle Silas and whispered into the breeze, "Thanks, old man. I finally understand what you meant." Because in the end, I hadn't just won a war, I'd rebuilt a community from the ashes of greed,